Some of the first permanent buildings at Yellowstone National Park were U.S. military buildings. They were called Fort Yellowstone, as you see here. Fort Yellowstone was eventually turned over to the National Park Service, and today it is used by the National Park Service for its own personnel. The BOQ has become the visitor center. The chapel remains as a chapel. The barracks are used for offices, and the officers' quarters continue to be used by the park officials for them and their families. This is the old barracks, now used for offices for the National Park Service. Seeing as though we were at Fort Yellowstone, I thought it'd be a nice idea to take a horse ride, so we all took off one morning and went on a short ride. I suppose the most amazing thing about that ride was that everybody came back in good condition.
Let's go see the old geezers. No, not us.
The most famous geyser in the park is Old Faithful, and Old Faithful is south of the Mammoth Hot Springs. Of the approximately 10,000 hydrothermal features in the park, clearly the best known is Old Faithful. It puts out thousands of gallons of steaming water, thundering into the sky with each eruption. Old Faithful has rarely missed its eruptions during its 120 years of observation. While we were there, the geyser was erupting about every 88 minutes, but it varies between about an hour and 3 hours in between eruptions. Geologists say that underneath Old Faithful, deep in the earth, there's a chamber about the size of a bus. And then there's a narrow neck leading up from that chamber into another chamber which is about the size of a car. And then that's followed by another narrow neck to the surface. It's this double chambered effect that apparently has an impact on exactly how and why Old Faithful erupts. Yellowstone has about 60% of the world's geysers. There's 102 of them. The fact of the matter is that only Iceland and New Zealand come close to having the number of geysers that you find concentrated at Yellowstone National Park. What drives all of the Yellowstone thermal activity, of course, is a magma chamber, a hot spot in the earth. A magma chamber only about 4 miles beneath the surface of the earth, as opposed to the 25 or 30 miles that it usually is. This thin crust above the magma chamber is fractured in many different places, and water trickles down into it. The magma chamber in this particular location is about 40 miles wide. The water running off from Old Faithful to the Firehole River. Now, the Firehole River got its name from an interesting occurrence. When the early trappers went to Yellowstone, they saw the steam coming up from the fumaroles, and they thought that that steam was smoke from a fire, and that's how the Firehole River got its name. Old Faithful is not the largest geyser. The largest geyser is Steamboat, which is about halfway between Old Faithful and Mammoth Hot Springs. This happens to be Steamboat. Steamboat erupts on a very irregular basis. The last major eruption was May 23rd. However, there have been periods of time when it has gone for decades without erupting, although more typically it erupts a couple of times a year. When Steamboat does give a major eruption, it can go up 300 or 400 feet. Now, that's pretty Faithful can get. This next geyser is Clepsydra, but it's a special kind of geyser. This geyser is a fountain. The difference between a regular geyser and a fountain geyser has to do with the way that the nozzle is shaped. The geyser doesn't have to go straight up or in any particular defined direction. That is, it can go in multiple different directions as it goes off. And so the effect is more like seeing a city fountain with bursts of water going off in several different directions at several different times. This makes a really nice display, and in many ways it was more attractive than any of the other geysers, including Old Faithful. Most of Yellowstone is covered by a large volcanic caldera. That's what causes all the thermal works. Now this caldera is about 50 miles long and about 20 miles wide. The magma is only about 4 miles from the surface, and that's what gives you all the heat to run all the thermal activity. The magma heats the crust, and snow melts above and flows through the fissures down towards where the magma, the runoff is heated and expands, and eventually it's pushed back to the surface. Yellowstone National Park gives off 30 times more heat than any place else in the Rocky Mountains. In addition, it's seismically active and has 25 earthquakes a week. That's more than any place in the United States outside of California. The last major eruption, represented by that caldera, was about 600,000 years ago. Now, it's not been the only eruption. That eruption, the one 600,000 years ago, was roughly equivalent to about 1,000 Mount St. Helens eruptions. This is a map of that most recent volcanic eruption caldera, the way that it still exists in the park. But there was another one about 1.4 million years ago, and one even before that about 2 million years ago. And those were as much as 2,500 times the force of Mount St. Helens. These maps show the extent of the older eruptions of the caldera. Now this scenery is pretty, but there's another way we want to show it to you, and that will become apparent in a few minutes. The river has worn away some of the earth and exposed the history of the continent. Look at those vertical columns that are all in a row near the top of the valley. That's basalt, and that basalt was laid down in the 1.4 million year ago. That's 25 feet thick. And those three eruptions at the Yellowstone area are not the only eruptions that have ever occurred from this hotspot. This hotspot has been slowly drifting to the northeast for millions and millions of years, as you can see here. 12 million years ago, the hotspot was in Idaho, and 20 million years from now, perhaps it will be in Canada. Come to think of it, every 600,000 or 700,000 years they seem to have an eruption. The last one was 600,000 years ago. We're about due for another one. We better hurry.
ahead, go again.
Okay. Yellowstone Park is 3,472 square miles, which would equal about 2,002,002 square acres.
2.2 million square acres.
Okay.
All
We're going to do it again.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yellowstone Park is 3,472 square acres. It would...
Square miles.
Oh, geez. Okay. Yellowstone Park, let's wait.
Okay, you can go now.
Yellowstone Park is 3,372 square miles, which would equal 2.2 million acres. Connecticut and Delaware would both fit into Yellowstone Park. The elevation is 8,000 feet.